This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 76 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today we're talking all about the kindness of strangers when you travel. I have had so many little incidents during my travels of people who've helped me out and been far kinder than they needed to be, for no apparent reason at all, for no gain for themselves, just being kind strangers. And I'm very glad to tell you that my three guests today have also had these similar amazing experiences regularly, and they're telling about some of their favourite kindness of strangers moments today. So before we get on to that, I want to talk about a different kind of strangers, because I just want to remind any Perth, Western Australia listeners who might be strangers to me at the moment, or might not be, that I want to be more than strangers. I'd like to be friends. So do remember to come along to the Thoughtful Travellers meetup on the 29th of November. I'll leave a link for the tickets and all of the information about it in the show notes, or look on Facebook, etc. You'll find it there. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers Meetup, or look in Not a Ballerina, or our wonderful Thoughtful Travellers Facebook group, because I'm looking forward to turning a few strangers into friends. It's going to be so much fun. So speaking of strangers, my first guest today is Kelly Dunning, who I actually got in touch with because she runs a travel blog and she talked about the topic of hobbies on your travels. And it's something I really wanted to explore more. So that's coming up in a later episode. But first up today, Kelly and I got on to the topic of the kindness of strangers. And she had so many stories to tell about strangers who she'd met on her travels. And this is one of them.
Probably one of the most entertaining stories is took place in Angkor Wat in Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided, Angkor Wat, if for anyone who hasn't been there, is like an enormous temple complex in Cambodia. So it's imagine like the Tomb Raider kind of the temples with the crumbling, with the vines crawling over them, and beautiful carved stone faces, and there's thousands of temples there. So you can explore it all day till you're completely exhausted and you can't see it all. And it's amazing. And so what we decided to do was it was Lee and I and another friend of ours, a German girl, and we rented bikes for the day. And we got up at 3:30 in the morning.
Oh, that's early.
Because we wanted to see the sunrise over this famous sunrise temple. Is like the thing to do at that Angkor Wat. So we rode our bikes across like these dusty old dirt roads and to Angkor Wat, and the bicycles were the kind of, like the European style bike with the big curved handlebars and the high seat and the basket, that you'd ride to the market in Paris with the little baguettes.
Just going to say, when I lived in Japan, we always called them shopping bikes. So yeah,
yeah,
I know what you mean.
They were like that. So they weren't well suited to bumpy dirt roads,
no.
But we managed. And do you know how much it cost for us to rent a bike for 24 hours in Cambodia?
No, I'm imagining relatively cheap.
It was $1.
Oh, wow.
one American dollar
for
the bike rental. It was great, but it reflected in the quality of the bikes.
Fair enough, yes. You can't expect much for $1.
But it was pretty fun. So we rode there and we watched the sunrise, which is one of the most incredible travel moments of my life. Just seeing the sun come up and illuminate all the details of this temple. And then we spent the next, several hours just riding all the way around these temples and exploring them. And then at one point we stopped for lunch and we locked up the bikes with the lock that the bike rental place had given us. And after we ate our lunch, we came back and I went to go unlock the bikes, and the key snapped off inside the lock.
Oh dear.
And so now we're in big trouble, because not only have we rented these bikes and they're stuck there, but we're stuck there because they were our mode of transport.
This is bad news.
So we're kind of like, oh my God, what do we do? And we're all kind of panicking. And there was this group of tuk-tuk drivers just hanging out, like in Southeast Asia, the tuk-tuk drivers just kind of hang out in the corner
chatting and
chat and smoke cigarettes and just like talk to each other. And they were watching us start to panic. And one of the guys came over to us and was like, hey, you okay? And we told him what had happened. And he kind of smiled and he was like, no problem. And he went back to his tuk-tuk and opened up the back of it and took out a massive hammer.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know why he keeps that in the back of his tuk-tuk, but
so many questions.
He comes back over and he's like, yeah, I can help you guys. And he gets a block of wood and just like puts it underneath the bike lock and then just starts smashing it.
Oh no.
Just like bashing the heck out of this bike lock with his hammer. And so Lee and I and our German friend were like, oh, okay.
What can you do?
And it's like, it was starting to help. Like the bike lock wasn't very good quality, so it was starting to fall apart. And then all of the other tuk-tuk drivers started to gather around because they were like intrigued of what was going on. And they were all taking turns. I was like, I want to have a go.
It's like a piñata or something. Everyone wants to be the one who breaks it.
Yeah, and maybe it's like a, vent your frustrations kind of a thing.
Yeah, true.
Like if they've had a bad day, like, they're just smashing stuff with a hammer. And I think like even Lee and I had a turn with the hammer just for fun. And like eventually, after about maybe 15 minutes of smashing, the lock breaks apart, and we can have our bikes back, and we're free, and we're not stuck. Yay. And I was like so happy. We couldn't lock them up again, but we could ride the rest of the temples and then ride straight back to Siem Reap.
Perfect.
And it was like, oh, you saved us. We were so happy that we went to the nearest little like canteen restaurant place and just bought all the tuk-tuk drivers beer.
Oh, beautiful.
It was fantastic.
So I bet they love that.
I have this photo of us just like cheersing beers with this tuk-tuk driver that saved us.
That's fabulous. Oh, isn't that wonderful? So and it's had to happen so often when you find yourself in trouble, no matter what the problem is, that there'll be people hanging around who are just more than happy to help out. It happens all the time, doesn't it, when you travel?
It happens so much, and it's really wonderful when it happens. And it's just a great memory.
I just love the mental picture of all these tuk-tuk drivers standing around taking it in turns to bash this lock with the hammer. It's a great story, and one of those many times when strangers really help you out. And Kelly actually did send me a photo, which I'll include in the show notes, of herself and her friend standing around with one of the tuk-tuk drivers having the beer that they bought for them to celebrate their great help in getting them out of a sticky situation. It's such a great story. Now, another great story is coming up with Sam Fisher. So Sam tells me a tale of Paris, a romantic city, but one that started out on her visit as a teenager with a bit of a problem. But fortunately, you might guess that a kind stranger comes along.
2008, I would have been like 19 or 20 years old, and I was in Europe visiting a friend of mine who was au pairing in the Netherlands, and she and I decided to go backpacking through Europe, as one does at that age.
Yes, as one does.
And we ended up in Paris. Well, we had been planning to go to Paris, but that was our first stop. And we walk out of the Gare du Nord and look at each other and we're like, where are we staying tonight? And we had that awful moment where we looked at each other. I thought you had done it. No, I thought you had booked.
Oh, no.
And we had nowhere to stay in July in Paris, which if you've ever been to Paris in July, there's no accommodation.
That's a busy time. I mean,
it's insane. And every single hostel was booked.
Oh, no.
Every hotel within our price range was booked. We made calls. We walked through doors. We begged. We and we found nothing. So we ended up back at the train station, kind of going, well, I guess we're going to have to sleep on the benches here and try again tomorrow. At least we have each other. It'll be okay. Well, so we're standing there kind of silently cursing ourselves and each other and the happenstance that had landed us, with nowhere to sleep in Paris. And this man bikes past us, and he's got this big beard and long ponytail, and he passes us, and then he turns around and he bikes right back, and he's like screeches to a stop in front of us, and we're like, take a step back. And he goes, "Hello, you are hippies, no?" And we're like, "Yeah, well, sure, yeah, we're hippies. We'd take that label." And we had this wonderful conversation with him about our situation, and he ended up leaving his name and number with us. I was like, "Look, if you really don't find anywhere, that's fine. Just call me. You can come stay with me." And we were like, "Thanks. That's never happened, strange
No way.
man."
Yeah.
Oh, well, just because, we're two teenage girls, and we're like,
Yeah, pretty risky. Yeah.
well, then it comes on dark and it's getting chilly. And we went, okay, let's talk about this realistically here. So we came up with a code word just in case we weren't comfortable. We needed to get out of there. We called and let people that we knew in Europe know what we were doing. They thought we were crazy, but they were like, okay, we'll be like on standby, all of this stuff. And we went to this strange person's house and knocked on his door and asked to stay with him. And, we're knocking on the door and we look at each other and we're like, are we crazy? Is this insane? And then his wife opens the door.
Oh, no. How wonderful.
So then the whole thing changed pretty drastically after that.
I feel
We were
much
like,
better
oh,
now.
Wow. Okay. And it ended up being an exquisite experience. His neighbor, was like on sabbatical or something and took us touring, took us to the Sacré-Cœur and just showed us all around. He took us to a concert that his friend was in, a bike tour of Paris.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
we got all this beautiful, inside experience that we never would have had if we had stayed in a hostel with other foreigners, that we never would have gotten if we just stuck to our own, path that we had planned for Paris. And we let that strange guy who biked up to us at the train station guide our trip there. And it ended up being a beautiful, beautiful experience. And I love to tell that story because it's insane. What we did was totally crazy, but at the same time, it paid off in spades.
Yes, and you were very sensible about it as much as you could be. You let other people know. You were cautiously risky. And obviously you didn't have the feeling that he was, too odd or too dangerous. And that's fabulous because most people are good. And if we kind of trust strangers more often, these wonderful things happen to us.
I very firmly believe that. I think it's one of the most wonderful what's the word I'm looking for? One of the most wonderful chances of travel. You never know who you're going to meet. And you never know if they're going to be, good or bad or helpful or hurtful. You don't know until you take that risk, until you engage, until you converse. Mm-hmm. And every time I've weighed my options and chosen to reach out, I have never once been disappointed.
That's very true. Can say the same for me. Absolutely true. So, it's often really well worth the effort to take those chances and get to know people and see what happens.
Exactly.
I love this story too. This cyclist with the beard and the long ponytail who turns out to be, just a kind stranger who's happy to help out the girls who've landed in Paris without any accommodation. And it all worked out brilliantly. It reminds me of a time that I do kind of regret on my travels. I just arrived in Estonia from Russia into the border town of Narva, just over the Russian border in Estonia. And I know I actually had accommodation booked that first night, but at the bus stop or bus station, I got chatting to an Estonian woman who was keen to have me and my boyfriend come to stay so that her daughter could practice English. and I think she'd maybe left a number or something. I don't know. It was kind of, early days in terms of internet, and I didn't, it wasn't easy. I just certainly didn't have a mobile phone or something. And I did think about her the following day, but we weren't staying long and it all seemed a bit complicated, and I'd never really done that, trust a stranger, go and stay with them kind of thing. But I'm sure she was, it was just a kind stranger, and it would have been really fascinating to go and stay with a local Estonian in Narva and find out heaps more about, this fascinating little town. It was, not too many years after Estonia had finally become free from Russia again. It would have been amazing. So that's one of my little travel regrets. And hearing Sam's story reminds me of that. And I'm glad Sam doesn't have that regret. And who knows what would have happened to them if they ended up just spending the night on a Parisian street instead. I think their plan B was much better. Now, my final guest today is Colin Clapp, and he talks about kind strangers bringing him some real life-changing moments when he was travelling in the United States.
There was one life-changing moment.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, very much. So I'm a snow sports person.
Uh-huh.
So even back then, I had this dream that somehow on this tour of the States this was the late 80s, I would find a way to get to a ski resort and work in a ski resort.
Right.
And a guy that we were bedding within a youth hostel in Los Angeles, who was from my hometown back in England, mentioned a guy who was currently living in Colorado, the Rocky Mountains, ski resorts galore. And he gave me his name, and I reached out to him as best I could back in those days. I think it was always, on your phone trying to ring or, paying public phone. There's no text messaging and all of that.
Of course, yes.
and just kept ringing and didn't get an answer. And eventually left on my trip to try to get to the Rocky Mountains. So I was getting closer and closer to him, and the phone wasn't being picked up or the messages weren't being answered. And then I was pretty much within driving distance of where they were, and I rang again, and the phone got picked up by one of his housemates, not by one of his housemates. So this guy did not know me from Adam, had never heard of me, knew not who I was. I don't know what I said to him, but all he said was, "You just get here as fast and as safe as you can," or something words to those effect. And we can't wait to see you.
Oh.
And I arrived, and no one was in. So there was 4 guys living in the house, and no one was in. I said goodbye to my driving partner, who just dropped me at this house. I had my backpack. The house was locked up. I sat on their doorstep, just looking like a dishevelled traveller. But I'm in the Rocky Mountains. It's
beautiful.
It's a beautiful place. And, I've got not a care in the world in those days. And a little while later, another guy, another one of the 4, and this wasn't the first one or the second one.
Another one.
One of the 4 came into the house, saw me sitting on his doorstep. He'd just done a day's work on a construction site or something like that. He said, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I don't recall the exact words, but he said, "Oh, in you come." And next thing I know, I'm showered up, and I have a recollection that he must have been the last one into the house, so he was sleeping on the couch bed, and that was the only other place. I think he and I slept on the same bed, and I'm still in contact with number 2 and number 3.
Really? Oh.
40 years later, not number 1. It turned out that the number 1 owned the house or rented the house, and the other 3 were all mates together.
Oh, okay, right.
And so number 2, the guy who answered the phone, I ended up being at his wedding a few years later in America.
Wow.
He came and visited my parents in the UK. We still swap special messages very occasionally that just say, we're friends forever, even though I haven't seen him for a decade or so, you kind of know you're going to meet again.
Yeah. And you know when you do that it's like no time has passed.
Yeah, it's very special memories and relationships were unfolding from that. And I mean, I'm nearly in tears just thinking about that.
Yeah, I've got shivers.
That particular guy, I've told him on more than one occasion he changed my life by that phone call.
Yeah, yeah. Could have had any other reaction. But most people wouldn't be so welcoming. It's amazing.
Yeah, and he had no idea of what that meant, because it meant that I had a place to stay in Colorado, and from there I got a job and all sorts of other stories, and it just was such a formative part of my life, because, you know, Amanda, I could probably talk about this whole episode and take up the whole podcast, but that experience of being in America, and specifically that period of being in Colorado, changed my life, because when I went back to the UK, I knew, you know, the mind had expanded, and, you know, what's that saying? When a mind expanded can't shrink. And it doesn't mean it's got a better brain or anything like that. It's just you've now got more experiences and more
possibilities,
and nothing could live up to that. And so anything I did in the following years, I was always like, well, I've experienced a life that's better than this, so why do I have to settle for this? You know? And I never knew the answers, but I always knew there was a better way.
Well, some years later, Colin's gone on to now be living with his partner and their daughter in Penang at the moment, but setting themselves up for a location-independent lifestyle, so the world's at their feet. And, you know, all of these things trace back to these kind of moments along the way that teach you there's a different way to live and a different way to travel as well. So another great story about the kindness of strangers. Speaking of kindness, as we wrap up for today, if you are feeling in a particularly kind mood, I would be so appreciative if you could hop over to iTunes, search for the Thoughtful Travel podcast there, and leave a rating and a review. It really, really helps other people find the podcast, and I am still recovering from the loss of all my wonderful reviews from when we changed away from the network. So please, that would be amazing. Okay, now enough of that begging. The show notes for this episode will be at notaballerina.com/76, and all of this info you can find there if you want to look up our guests or anything else. So first up, we had Kelly, and she's from Global Goose, and you can find her blog at global-goose.com. She's currently, I forgot to mention when I introduced her, or when I spoke to her, she was based in Tbilisi in Georgia for a couple of months, and she's definitely the first guest I have spoken to in Tbilisi. So that was really cool, I thought. I love chatting with people who are literally all over the world. Up next, I spoke with Sam from High Hopes Travel. So her website at highhopestravel.com is still on the way, but you can catch up with her on Instagram, and she is High Hopes Travel on Instagram. And last but very much not least, I spoke with Colin from Parenting, Passports and Profits, and logically you can find him at parentingpassportsandprofits.com. And I spoke to him from Penang, so it was a real multi-continental kind of episode today. Now, also in the show notes, I'm going to leave a link to the Thoughtful Travellers meetup in Perth. So if you are listening to this before the 29th of November 2017, then, and you're in Perth, then do click over, grab a ticket and come along. It would be amazing. I also want to link back to a previous episode, way back in episode 7. We talked about some unexpected travel friends and when strangers turned into friends. One of my favourites was one of the story that Bethany from Flashback a Family told about a monk she met up with and, became a Facebook friend with a monk, which is, I don't know, it seemed not right, but somehow really cool. So that's at notaballerina.com/07, or just scroll back to the episode 7 if you're on your podcast player. Don't forget to join our Facebook group. Lots of fun happening in there. It's Thoughtful Travellers. Tweet me at Amanda Kendall, and you can use the hashtag ThoughtfulTravelPod. And you can also find out more on Facebook if you just go to facebook.com/notaballerina. Thank you for listening, and look out for those kind strangers when you travel. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.